Imagine, for a moment, a man who believed he was more than just a soldier. In 1950, Douglas MacArthur was, honestly, a living legend in Tokyo. He had rebuilt Japan and now, commanded the Korean War. To the American public, he was an untouchable and golden hero. But inside the high command, he was, well, a growing nightmare. The general began to speak as if he owned the world. He walked with a confidence that felt ancient and, honestly, very cold. MacArthur dismissed the orders of the politicians in Washington, D.C. He believed that only a warrior could understand the true victory. To him, President Truman was just a small and weak bureaucrat. The god of the Pacific was operating on a private frequency. A dangerous pride was starting to cloud his strategic, brilliant mind. The soldiers under his command treated him like a supreme deity. They followed his bold Inchon landing into the mouth of hell. Success had reinforced his belief that he could never ever fail. He mocked the warnings about a massive Chinese military intervention. He truly believed the enemy would flee before his legendary name. It was the same arrogance that once haunted the great Patton. But as the winter of 1950 arrived, the wind turned gelid. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers crossed the frozen border. The American army was suddenly facing a tidal wave of blood. MacArthur realized that his tactical genius was not enough now. He needed a weapon that would end the world to win. A secret file was being prepared for the president's desk. MacArthur sat in his office, staring at a map of Manchuria. He realized he couldn't win a conventional war against such mass. His solution was a blueprint that would chill the human soul. He wanted to drop a nuclear necklace across the entire border. He requested exactly 34 atomic bombs for a single strike. The goal was to create a radioactive belt of permanent death. He didn't see the bombs as a last and desperate resort. To MacArthur, they were just another tool in his metal chest. He wanted to waste the Chinese supply lines for 60 years. The general believed that total destruction was the only peace. He wrote down the targets with a hand that never trembled. The atomic list was a direct challenge to the creator itself. His staff officers were in a state of absolute silent shock. They saw the radioactive clouds in the general's private vision. They knew that this move would trigger a global world war. But no one dared to speak against the hero of Inchon. The file was sealed and sent toward the White House rooms. MacArthur was gambling with the life of every living person. He believed the president would have no choice but to agree. MacArthur felt the weight of his stars gave him ultimate right. He was, honestly, ready to ignite the atmosphere to save his own ego. The pride of the warrior was now a threat to civilization. The messenger carried the map across the vast and blue ocean. The world's fate was now inside a single Pardo leather case. Harry Truman opened the secret folder in the quiet morning light. He expected a report on troop movements and winter supply needs, but as he saw the map of the nuclear strikes, he froze. The president's face turned a ghostly and very pale white color. He saw 34 targets that would start a nuclear apocalypse. MacArthur wasn't asking for help, he was demanding the end. Truman realized that his greatest general had lost all his mind. The atomic necklace was a plan of pure and tactical madness. If the United States used those bombs, Moscow would respond in kind. The president saw the shadow of a third and final war. He felt the crushing weight of the office on his tired soul. MacArthur had backed the entire nation into a lethal corner. The tension in the war room was thick and very incredibly heavy. The advisors whispered about MacArthur's God complex and his pride. Truman knew that he had to stop the general immediately today. But how do you fire a hero who is loved by everyone? MacArthur was, actually more popular than the president in the American streets. A political and military civil war was starting in the dark, kind of brewing beneath the surface. Truman spent the night just looking at the general's nuclear map. Every icon of fire represented, millions of souls lost forever. He realized that MacArthur no longer respected the civilian law. The general was acting, honestly, like a king in a distant land. The president reached for his pen to sign the fatal order. The stars of MacArthur were about to fall from the sky. The news reached MacArthur through a simple and public radio broadcast. Truman didn't even give him the respect of a private call. The announcement was short, gelid, and really, incredibly final for him. General Douglas MacArthur was officially relieved of all his commands. The god of the Pacific was now just a man in rags. The world watched in a state of absolute and total shock. MacArthur sat in silence as the words hit the Tokyo air. He felt the betrayal of the bureaucrat deep in his heart. His wife reportedly saw a look of pure and cold fury. He believed he was the only one who could save America. Now, he was being discarded like a piece of broken gear. The era of the legendary five-star general was ending there. Back in the United States, the reaction was a violent one. People burned images of Truman in the public city squares. They demanded that MacArthur be made the next president now. The general returned home to a parade of millions of fans. He was the not-human hero who had been unfairly silenced. MacArthur used the spotlight to tell his final and, dark truth. He stood before Congress and spoke about old soldiers fading, but, behind the poetic words was a very sharp and bitter sting. He warned that a war without total victory was, well, a defeat. He never admitted the madness of his nuclear necklace plan. MacArthur took the secret of the map to his quiet exile, but Truman knew the world was saved by a single signature. We must ask why a genio like MacArthur would, honestly, suggest nukes. He saw the Chinese army as a force that was, in his words, not human. He saw their willingness to die in the thousands every night. To MacArthur, the red tide could not be stopped with lead. He believed the only way to save American boys was, really, radiation. It was a cold and mathematical logic born of deep desperation. He realized that the era of the fair fight was over. The West was facing a rival with endless and lethal numbers. The atomic bombs were his jerry can of the new age. He wanted to use the ultimate secret to close the gap. MacArthur felt the politicians were too weak to see reality. He saw himself as the only guardian of the Western soul. The strategic nightmare of 1951 echoes in our world of 2026. We see the same patterns of mass and of technological fear. MacArthur's plan was a precursor to the Noriega trap logic. He wanted a sudden and total decapitation of the enemy's will, but he forgot that a leader must also carry a heart. His fatal mistake was placing the bomb above the humanity. The archives now reveal the depth of his nuclear obsession. He had even planned to use radioactive waste as a barrier. It was a level of biological and atomic war never seen. Stalin was watching from the Kremlin with a terrifying smile. He hoped MacArthur would strike, giving him the excuse to. The world was a hair's breadth away from a total grave. For decades, the atomic necklace was, a buried and dark secret. History books mostly focused on the insubordination and, honestly, the soft politics. They really didn't want the public to know just how close we actually came. MacArthur's private papers, well, they were locked in a very deep vault. But, the truth has a way of returning to the light. We now see the maps that Truman saw on that morning. The markings on the map were precise, cold, and very lethal. They showed the end of the Chinese nation as a power. MacArthur had calculated the fallout and the death with ease. It reveals a man who had become a ghost of war. He was no longer a general, he was a dark architect. Eisenhower later saw these files and was deeply and truly moved. The silence of the high command was, in fact, a form of protection. They just didn't want to destroy the myth of the great general. They allowed him to, fade away with his medals and pride. But the Noriega trap of the 1950s was the demission. It was really the only way to keep the world from burning. The secret maps remain as a warning to every future leader. We look at these documents and honestly, we feel a chilling dread. It reminds us that sometimes our heroes are actually our biggest risks. The madness of Patton and MacArthur, well, they're really the same soul. These were warriors who just couldn't transition into a peaceful world. They needed an enemy, to feel the eternity of their lives. The price of their genius was, in fact, the fear of the presidents. In the end, history belongs to the ones who didn't fire. MacArthur's story is, well, a haunting lesson about the weight of ego. It proves that the most lethal weapon is, honestly, a general's pride. Truman saved the world by ending his best warrior's career. The fatal cut of the 1950s gave us the world today. It's a rare truth that we must never, ever forget. We look back at the secret map and, we wonder now, what if Truman had been as aggressive as George S. Patton? Would the border be radioactive, or would we be ghosts? The patterns of history are always, waiting to be found. MacArthur's nuclear necklace is the ghost that still watches us. True authority is having the power and choosing not to. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the general's mind. The secret of Douglas MacArthur remains a profound historical truth. The world is full of these buried blueprints and rare stories. Keep looking for the truths that the official books miss. Thank you for spending your time with a friend like me. Until the next revelation, stay sharp and stay very wise.